because somebody's going to update the application server and the application is distributed to everyone immediately. We introduce change at such a rapid pace these days in our system, just get used to it. We're undergoing continuous change. Learn a new language. This one is geared towards the developers. A lot of developers will learn a language, and that language becomes their only language. There is no one single perfect language. It's not Visual Basic, it's not Java, it's a big list. I know quite a few programming languages, and I know that some are better at doing some things than others, and I use a mixture of them. It depends on what is my context, what am I trying to do. Sometimes SQL is the best language. Sometimes a little bit of PL SQL on top of the SQL is the best language, and sometimes Java calling some SQL and some PL SQL is the best way to do something. And sometimes PHP is, or Ruby, or X, or Y, Python, Tickle, whatever. Each one of these languages is appropriate in a different context. Don't tune a query. Tune the process, tune an algorithm, tune the approach. Think about this one. A developer was tasked with taking data from a staging table and placing it into the production data warehouse table. The developer writes the code for X in select star from the stage table, loop, insert into the production table. At the end of the loop, they commit. If you SQL trace that, you would see two SQL statements in the TK-Prof report, the select statement and the insert statement. The select statement is undoubtedly going to be a full scan. Can you make that go any faster? No. You have to read every row from it. We already know that. So we're not going to be able to tune that. The insert's going to be executed 1,000,000 times if there's 1,000,000 records in there. Could you make that go any faster, that insert? No, it's an insert. You can't tune it to go any faster. You're done, right? I mean, you've done your best. Go back to the algorithm. Go back to the application. And when I would look at that piece of code, I'd go, why is there any procedural code in there at all? This should be insert into table, select star from the other table, commit. Or maybe it should be insert append into the other table, select star from some table. Maybe we should be doing a direct path load. But by looking at the algorithm and coming up with a totally different way to do it, we can make something go much faster. DBAs are happy to make something go 10 or 15% faster. They get really excited if they make it go 10% faster. A developer can make something go 10 or 15 times faster by changing their approach to the database, by doing something differently. So this is sort of a radical idea. Don't tune a query, tune the process. Many times people will give me a 15-page query and say, tune this. And I say, no. No, what I want is, what are you trying to do? Because your 15-page query, it might have bugs in it. It probably does. It has lots of assumptions that I don't know about. I want your specification. Before you wrote this query, somebody must have told you what they were trying to do. I want that piece of information. Lots of times you get a blank stare because they never did that in the first place. That query just sort of evolved over time. It started as a real small query that got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Go back to the root. Go back to the core. Find out what you're trying to do and perhaps think about re-implementing the algorithm. Always question everything in a non-annoying way, of course. I like the little cartoon there, question all authority, and the person standing there going, why should I, right? It's a very recursive sort of thing. There's a lot of information out there on the internet. A lot of it is very old. A lot of it is very new. A lot of it is very wrong. A lot of it is very right, correct. When you're reading this information, look for a couple of things. Look for a timestamp on the article, for example. If I'm reading an article, especially a news article, I look for the timestamp first so that I can develop the context. It was not too long ago that United Airlines in the US, a US airline company, their stock dropped hugely one day. Why? Because there was a stock analyst reading a news feed. It was like a Google News feed, and an article about United from 2 or 3 years ago when they declared bankruptcy came across the newswire. And he went, oh my gosh, they're declaring bankruptcy again. And he sold United. And then everybody else started selling United until somebody looked at the timestamp on the article and said, oh, this applied to version 6. It doesn't apply to version 11, which is production right now. United Airlines was not in trouble, and their stock immediately recovered. Look for the timestamp. If it says the year 2000 on it, it's probably dated. In the year 2000, most people were migrating to 8.0 or getting off of 8 and moving into early releases of 9. But I mean, that's a long time ago in our industry. It's 9 years ago now. The other thing to look for is an example to go along with it. If somebody says you should do it this way, there must be some reason. Not, oh, I did it this way once and it was great. But rather, you want to do it this way because, to help you be able to visualize what would happen if you did it that way in your circumstances, in your context. And the third thing that's really important you want is the ability to provide feedback. There's nothing more frustrating than going to an internet webpage that somebody's pointed me to. There's no way to get in touch with the author of the article. There's no comment section, and you read something that is so wrong, but you can't fix it, right? That's very frustrating. So if I can't comment on something, I tend to ignore it. Don't know if you've noticed on OTN, if you read the documentation, at the bottom of each page, you have the ability to comment on the documentation. And I know people do, because I worked on the rewrite of the concepts guide. So when people comment on the 11G Release 2 concepts guide, I get an email about it. And we have to look at it and evaluate it. If somebody's asking a question on the documentation, probably means the documentation wasn't clear enough, or they're pointing out a mistake that was made. The documentation does have mistakes. Why does it have mistakes? Because things change over time. The documentation used to be correct, but it doesn't work exactly that way anymore. So the ability to comment on something, to put reviews on it, to add feedback and interact with the author, that's important. So look for those three things: the timestamp, the review capability, and some evidence that what is being said in the article is true. Never stop testing ideas. Things change. I still remember how it works in version 5. Literally, the tuning techniques, the best practices of yesterday are today's performance and maintenance headaches. A tuning technique from the 1980s was never use implicit cursors in PL SQL. More specifically, don't do a select into. That was true 20 years ago. But because so many people learned it, and they kept saying it, and they kept saying it, and they kept saying it, if you say something often enough, it becomes true all by itself, right? And so I remember when I followed up somebody on a forum, and I said, oh, you should write the code like this, and I used select into, and somebody else came in and said, I would fire a developer who uses select into. Everyone knows it's slower. So I came back with a benchmark, and I said, it runs faster for me. How about you? And he runs it and he goes, it is faster, uses less resources. I never knew that. And that's because things change over time. So the things we think we know are actually things we knew in the past and might be different today. So don't be afraid to